I'm just going to do an introduction to tell you about our artist today. It is my pleasure to introduce you to Minsker. He is a diverse artist, writer.
Hello, Wichita. I just want to say a few things about myself, a little disclaimers. I grew up in Washington, D.C. I'm dyslexic, not a little bit, very dyslexic. In Washington, in the time period through the 70s and 80s, a lot of violence. 10 friends were murdered. I spent a lot of time being dyslexic, being harassed for being dyslexic, and at a certain point, I tried to figure out how I could use that to my advantage. So a lot of the art practices that I do are looking at systems and how I can work and change this system to benefit me and others. And the disclaimer is, I'm a white guy from a family that has lawyers, so if I'm doing street art, anything where I'm bending the rules and breaking the rules, I'm going into that very aware of the consequences. I've been arrested for it, I've been harassed for it, but I go into that prepared for it, right? So when I say I'm like doing street art or I make a film, I'm saying that coming from a position where I know the consequences will not be too severe. So I'm not saying to follow exactly what I'm doing. I'm going to tell you some of the things I do, but I don't want any of you guys getting in trouble and getting arrested. And if you do, please be prepared for it. I think when you're dyslexic, you realize that within the systems, everything is made always at the mercy of gatekeepers. If you want to write a book, publishing companies. If you want to do a film festivals, distributors, networks. Trick was to figure out how you can become the gatekeeper or sidestep the gatekeepers. Because no matter what you are going to do, you're going to be relying on somebody else, someone else's permission to be able to do what you do. I think I'm going to run this a little like a game show. Does anyone know what a curator is?
A curator is somebody who makes collections of works in various mediums to fit a certain theme or to put together a certain relation to each other. So they're a collection of works that are related to each other that a person collects.
Let me pick out a prize for you. Here you go. Fanzine, Psychomotor Zine, here you go. That's for you. Winner every time. Doing as an artist, we found the first thing was curators. Curators, you'd have to know a curator. How does a curator work? So generally, a curator will be somebody who has a space, works with a gallery, is making an art show based around one theme. And 20 years ago, about when we started the antagonist movement, there was a thing in New York City where you had to be defined as a curator. Curators were absolutely not making art and not being artists. We're going to take spaces, co-opt the spaces, and we'll curate our own events. So I think you guys should all be aware of this guy, Dan Cameron. He's a big curator in New York City. He himself has been looking at the system of curation, and he gets asked to curate so many events that he was like, well, wait a minute, I'm going to start a company. I'm going to have many curators working underneath me, so then when I can curate multiple events, he does a lot of the biannuals. And now he started doing these art tours where curators are giving tours to people in the galleries, which is genius because it's like, how do curators make money? If you're a curator, you need to have a gallery or space that is going to be like, you're like a freelancer. So it's like, we'll pay you this much money. That's your budget. You're going to do this show. So it's tough to make a living as a curator. This guy is making changing the whole game of how you curate, saying that any of you that are doing visual arts, start looking into how to become a curator. Like, do the research. Instead of waiting for somebody to anoint you, you say, I am now a curator. I'm going to find a space, and I'm going to curate that space.
In any other subtext, you'd think that he was a juvenile delinquent, but because he's from New York, he's an artist.
You told me you had just attacked somebody with a machete.
And he told me that he's never going to stop creating, no matter what.
His entire life, from when he wakes up in the morning, from the very first moment he opens his eyes till the moment he closes his eyes. He's thinking about ways he can challenge himself and his cohorts into being creative.
I mean, I can't imagine making a film that wasn't anti-establishment. I mean, have you seen it? He's not part of the establishment.
I just knew that he wrote, and I knew that he was dyslexic, but I hadn't really considered what the two of those things meant until after I started editing his raw work.
Diagnosed at a very young age, and it's core to who you are.
30 years ago, Ethan started a zine that became an art movement.
It's known that the art world now is just a place that's about money and moving and shaking. It's not really about discovering artists or any of that anymore. So as artists, we have to carry on in our own sort of collective way, because I think we're some of the last that are left in the Alamo.
Oh God, it's so narcissistic. Who would make a film about themselves?
This guy. So again, this is that same sort of theory, is that I looked at a lot of art documentaries, I did the research on it, I said, okay, well, it would be great if I had an art documentary about myself. Am I going to wait for somebody else to do that? No, I'm just going to do it myself. You know, that's everywhere that you can rent and stream movies. Please watch it, review it, let your friends know. That's a plug. Because of that, you know, you put these things out in the world, and every time you put something out, it leads to more opportunities. I'm literally here because she watched another film, Self-Medicated. The concept is put as many things out as you can. Don't wait for somebody to give you permission. Sometimes that might mean beg, borrow, cheat, or steal, or bending the rules. Do not get arrested because of me, please. Hit me.
Would you say that in the modern day, the reason that they have to put themselves out there so much and self-advertise and make themselves known so much is impacted by our internet age that we're living in? Because people are constantly talking and creating content online. You have to be screaming and screaming and screaming to make anything you do get noticed. Do you think that's a part of it too, and it plays an aspect in that? Or do you think this has always been true?
Always been true, but you're absolutely right. I mean, that's literally why I made a movie. There's all sorts of cultural things when it comes to art, wherever you are in the world. In New York City, to make a film about yourself, every artist is like, absolutely, yeah, why would you not? But when I go show this in Germany or Australia or somebody else, they're like, oh, that's so weird. Like, you know, you're kind of really putting yourself out there. You must have a huge ego. But it's like, I come from a place where, you know, New York City is 24/7. You are competing with the best things, the best shows constantly. You cannot sit there and wait for somebody to come along and discover you. That just does not happen. You're discovered because you said, look at me, look at me, look at me. I do a show called Infinite Spaghetti that's for these guys, Project Nerd. It's like this website where it's like cosplay and all these things I don't know. Yeah, I mean, they're kind of like this popular thing in cosplay. Like, I am not a cosplayer, clearly, right? I like to be my own superhero. I said, yeah, I'll do a show, but I want it to be cosplay and creative stuff. So I started interviewing people that were outside of my scope. And this woman, Caitlin, that I interviewed a few weeks ago said, you know, she's an animator for BuzzFeed. And she said the way she got work was, she said, I didn't care who it was. I made sure they knew I wanted to be an animator. There's the janitor. Hey, you know, I'm an animator. The guy making my coffee. Hey, you know, I do animation. And then at one point, somebody was like, oh, I know this animator, and she got a job. You have to advocate for yourself. Isolation and being shy kind of goes hand in hand with creativity, but you still have to figure out a way to get yourself seen. You know, I mean, that's literally like on the thing there, that's the street art that I do. And I know it's cute and whatever, but I was doing sketchbooks, I was drawing animals, and I said, okay, well, I like how these look, but instead of just keeping it in my sketchbook, how can I use that to generate more interest? So I was like, well, I'll put street art up. You should, as an artist, always express yourself, however scary that might be. You know, if you don't fight the good fight, there's nobody will do it for you. When you're looking at systems, how do you make yourself stick out? So there's a lot of people who do wheat paste. There's a lot of people who do paint. So I started doing street art that was paper mache, three-dimensional, and I started with guns, and I'd put guns all over the city of New York, just white guns. It's about gun violence and the reduction of gun violence. I noticed they'd all be gone. And I was like, oh, okay, well, people hate him or whatever. 10 years after the fact, a curator friend of mine was in an artist's house, a well-known artist, and he looks up on the wall and he goes, that's Ethan's gun. And he was like, who's Ethan? I found that on the street and stole it. And it's like, now we know each other because I put this piece that got into his collection. The last one I did was these badges of shame. So I don't know how many of you are familiar with Eric Gardner. Okay, so Eric Gardner was a gentleman in Staten Island who was killed by the police. He was choked to death for selling loose cigarettes, right? And so in my mind, I started thinking about the mother. She raised this child to adulthood. That's a large investment, and then somebody decides because he's selling cigarettes that his life wasn't valuable. So I started doing these things, badges of shame. So it was like, if you're an officer and you're wearing a badge and it's a badge of honor, I get it. But on the other side, if you're an officer who does something dishonorable, you should have to wear a badge of shame. So I made these paper mache badges that are neon bright warning colors, and it has your worst thing that you done. So I had Daniel Pantaleo, who was the officer who killed Eric Gardner, choking Eric Gardner with the cigarettes falling out, and I put those around the city too. Some you put in front of a police station, you know, that's like probably like 15 minutes before it's ripped down. But then other ones that are up, you know, 2 weeks or so, and then somebody takes it home. So I'm saying, like, you know, you should feel free to express yourself because there's not much change systematically if it doesn't come from the creative mind.
What is it like traveling and going to talk to kids?
I don't know. What is it like having some weird guy in a camo suit come talk to you? Here's your prize. To explain this, the Antagonist movement was a group of artists/bartenders in New York City that had a dead night on Thursday night. And we're sitting around like, well, we're not making money. We have wall space here. Why don't we start organizing shows with our stuff, then our friends' stuff, and then at least if we're bored, we'll have people we know hanging out and we'll get tips. We'll give them free drinks, we'll make some money, show our art. Once we did that, then the owners were like, crazy night, please keep doing this. We kept doing it, we're like, all right, so now we need to call ourselves something. Came up with a manifesto, and then it started being, other venues started coming to us saying like, hey, can you do an event here? So it's like we had a writer's night. And in the writer's night, we had writers like Augustus Burroughs, we had Legs McNeil, like we had, so it's like we do these events, co-opt spaces that are not being used, make it a laboratory so artists can develop their talent without having to worry about the repercussions of economics. So in New York City, if you want to show anything, every place is going to go like, oh, you're a gallery. Well, you have to be able to sell thousands and thousands of dollars of art before they'll even consider you, because the gallery has to pay staff, overhead, taxes, and everything. So they don't want to hear it from you unless you can generate the money, and that's fair. So we wanted to provide venues that were not linked to economics for the artist to show. So we did music nights, writers' nights, film nights, visual art nights, performance art nights, illegal street art, and then we kept doing that. We started getting press, and after years, then we had people from other countries come to us like, hey, can you come do an event here? And then they would get the local government to give us housing, to reduce flights, did art in a palace for 2 months. Once you start doing stuff, more stuff happens, but if you're not doing stuff, nothing happens. And if you aren't trying, then it's no. So you have to be comfortable with the concept of doors being slammed in your face and people saying no, and you have to love that. You have to eat it up. Give me another no, because I'm gonna come back later and see, hey, you remember that thing you said no to? You see how we generated thousands of dollars in interest for these people? Eat your own no.
What happens, like when you put the guns up or the paper maches, you don't sign them obviously because that artist didn't know that was yours or that curator. But what would happen if you did sign them? Would it be like another fine in New York basically?
Kind of the thing is like the gearing like with laziness. So you could put your name on it. I put my name on those. I mean, the concept of signatures is that it's supposed to give value to the work if it's signed by the artist, to be honest. That's not necessarily true today. So it's like if you do a piece of artwork and you put it on social media, generally people know who you are. So if I do the badges of shame, I don't need to put my name on it because I know if anybody is looking for me or finding it, they'll know, especially within street art. Whenever I put up a piece of street art, a new one, there's a ton of people out there that are kind of like street art photographers. And they'll be like, where is that? And then they all rush to photograph it, and then they spread that message. And then those same group of people, if they see your art on someone else's page, they'll tag me as the artist. So it's like, especially with social media, as long as you're documenting your own work, you don't really need to put your name on it. But if you're doing street art, you have to be ready for the consequences of that. And sometimes, you know, for me, the risk is worth it. I try to do a thing though also where it depends on the location you're at. Like if you're in Portugal, in Lisbon, you know, and you're doing street art, you partner with somebody who is a street artist there. Because they'll tell you, like in Portugal, there's all these walls and roads that are by the Romans, right? So the thing with the police department there is like, that's hands off. If we catch you doing art on the walls that the Romans put up, we will catch you, we will beat you really badly, we will then throw you in jail. But if you're doing like stencils and street art anywhere else in the city, they'll be like right there, they don't care. So it's like you gotta partner with local people if you're going somewhere. And I would say the same thing in New York. It's like you don't wanna go and put it on certain places because you'll know it'll bring down a lot of heat.
What is something you would tell your younger self?
Oh boy. What would I tell my younger self? I have a thing where I want to rush through something. So it's like I get a new camera, I'm opening up the camera and I'm filming. And if I do something, I just want to like run out and do it. But now I know it's like if I take the time to research whatever it is I'm doing, find out if other artists are doing the same thing, find out if the film has the same title, find out if there's anything similar, work really hard to make sure you're changing that. Like it doesn't matter if somebody else is doing the same thing, it matters more that what you're making stands out and is unique. Hold on, I see Catherine has a question.
Okay, so we watched one of your not like movies, and you actually like told us about like when you were younger. And there was a part where you were talking about when your dad would come home from work and he would put on the news and it was during, like, it would be showing stuff in the Vietnam War. How did you deal with that as, like, a kid? Because when I was younger, still in elementary school, my dad had this app that whenever, like, a bomb went off in Afghanistan, it would make a ding. And that terrified me. So I'm like, how did someone else that, like, was hearing about this stuff deal with it?
How do you deal with your post-traumatic stress disorder? This is a good one. Yes, I grew up in a place where there was a lot of violence. I was 2 blocks away when Ronald Reagan got shot. I heard the shots. I've seen dead bodies. I've been on blocks where somebody has been run over. September 11th happened. I was there in New York. 30 of my 30 people I know were killed in that. I had friends who were, again, cops. Had to worry about them, paramedics. See, but that's also the thing, the magic of art. When you have stuff that happens that's bad, you could be somebody that goes out there and acts poorly. I grew up in a place where there was a lot of violence. I was very violent for a long time. I was somebody that would react to violence with extreme violence. And that's because I was somebody who was terrified. I was very scared I was going to be hurt. That also leads to what is post-traumatic stress disorder, and that can happen to anybody. If you're in a violent environment, it's going to affect you. Every one of you students here during COVID, that's going to affect you. You're not going to realize that now. You'll think like everything felt fine. But years later, this is a sad moment. We're sitting here with masks. I find doing something creative helped me suppress those bad thoughts, helped me keep down the depression. That's why I made a whole movie about it. But at the same time, I'd like to point out, if you're somebody who's struggling, it's okay to ask for help. It's okay to let people know. It's okay to go talk to a professional. I mean, I come from a place where I felt all of those things were weird and wrong for me. But as an adult, I realized that everybody has a different way to cope.
Desde que me dejaste, Por ese gil, multiplicaste mis ansias por mil. Mis noches son un delirio febril. Por suerte te busco.
So I fell in love with street art, and that's my thing. I paint on walls, and if ever get took out of me, I guess I will go back to be a crazy girl.
Ya no vuelvo a Quito, aquí me desquito. A la orilla del río ya no se siente el frío. Guayaquil City va a reventar. Todas mis penas se van al nivel del mar. Guayaquil City va a reventar. San Borondón y Bastión Popular. Vengo de la sierra, donde la gente se encierra. Montaña, frío, granizo, lluvia y niebla.
I think being an artist probably means you're a little bit crazy.
You know, I've never really looked back. There is no other way of living for me at this point.
Por ese gil, vivo tomando Xanax con Ribotril.
What do you do to keep your creativity flowing? Like, do you ever get affected by art block?
Art block, writer's block. Good question. When you're inspired, you make something new, that's all good. The times you're not inspired is when you're actually doing most of your work. So say it's like a book. You're inspired, you write something. When you're not inspired, you're doing the editing. If you have a painting, you're inspired, then you're going back and doing the details. So inspiration is a very small part of what you should be worried about. It's really about doing the focused work the rest of the time.
When it comes to a lot of the street art and controversial art that you do you ever think on something and then backtrack completely on the project, or you just go ahead and go with it?
Absolutely. So I came up with that concept of those badges of shame years ago. Like, I don't know how many years ago. And I said, I talked to a bunch of friends and I said, well, maybe I'm not appropriate to be doing this because I'm a very pink, white artist. This is more of a thing that should be from somebody of color who are more affected by it. And I kept talking to artists about it, and they're like, no, you kind of have to be the one to do it because this is your concept and your idea. If people give you a hard time about it, who cares? And then I was like, oh yeah, right. When I think about it, it's the parents. I just can't imagine as a parent doing that amount of work.
I was wondering, do you have to go to school, and would you recommend to go to school for art?
I've had this debate for years. Is art school worth going to? No. Aha, you see, you think no, because all that information you can look up on YouTube, all that stuff you can get out of books. That would be the assumption. I disagree with it, because here's a couple reasons. One, you are not going to study the things that you're not interested in. And art school is going to force you to do that. And those are tools that are necessary because the schools are going like, you need to know this. You don't want to know it, but you need to know it. And the other thing is the connections. So if you're just learning at home, you're not meeting all of these other people. All of these other people are your connection for work. They are also your competitor. You're in competition, but you'll find that these are the same people that are going to find you work. Like when you make a film, you have to have releases, personal releases. You have to have location releases. You have to have releases from all the music. Everybody who worked on the film has to have a contract. And you don't know any of this stuff, and you want to submit to festivals, you submit to a festival. The point is to get a distributor. The distributor, the first thing is going to say is, cool, we're going to get your film. We need insurance for the film. The insurance company is going to go, show me all the paperwork. And then you go, I don't have the paperwork. And the insurance company says, great, we're going to charge you $80,000 for the insurance in case you get sued. And then the distributor is going to go, we still can't take it because no network is going to take it because you didn't have the paperwork for it. So I had to take a film class, a law class. I did not want to take it, but I really needed it.
Where did you find all the camo and why?
Coming from someone who is wearing camo mask to camo mask. Fair question, why am I wearing this camo suit? The concept of showstoppers. If you're going to do an event and you're going to be out there, like maybe a group show or whatever, you need to do something that makes you stick out from the pack, that makes somebody stop and say, what the heck? And that show-stopping moment might be the difference between you getting press, between you meeting a curator. Show-stoppers. This is my event suit. I bought camouflage. I was in Asia. I had this suit made, a few other suits made, all camo. And the point is that when I go to an event, then I'm not just somebody at the event, I'm a part of the art show itself. So I'm a walking art piece. Now that concept doesn't come from me originally, it comes from like Truman Capote, Mark Twain, all these people who wore white suits. But for me, wearing like a camo suit is that if you're going to make art or be creative, it's combat, it is war, it is hard. You need weapons and you need tools, so this is another one of my weapons and one of my tools.
How do you deal with comparing yourself to other artists?
I have a problem where I never think what I'm doing is big enough or good enough. But that also always propels me to try to do something a little bit bigger. I do a zine, then I decide I'm going to write a book. So I'm always trying to do something a little bit bigger. In that process of doing something bigger, I'm also always comparing myself. I just did an event at Spring Break Art Fair, which in New York City is like the prominent young artist and curators. It's a very hard art show to get in. Getting into that, everybody around me was like, wow, that's really impressive you got into that. That's really great. But even after, my internal issues is that, oh, I didn't do good enough. I didn't do great enough. I didn't sell enough work. The choice is to use that as a driver to do more. I don't feel successful at all. But I also understand in my psyche that could be the thing that makes me push harder. This was my pitch to Spring Break, so I didn't just send a little like written thing. I made a little video to show them.
This is part of a larger art project, I Love You, New York, But You're Bringing Me Down, based on the LCD Sound System song, New York, I love you, but you're bringing me down. Like a rat in a cage, pulling minimum wage. New York, I love you, but you're bringing me down. Love for New York, but how it's always changing. And in New York, ever since I moved here in 1988, there's always been this sentiment of like, oh, I miss the old New York, as if whoever got there, they remember it when they first got there, as if that was the best New York would ever be. And it just continuously gets worse from there, even though it's progressing and the buildings are getting bigger. I live in downtown Manhattan in the East Village, and all you see is these glass buildings coming up all around you, so I somewhat feel the same thing. Now, some of these things are divided into like buildings and water towers and the kind of iconography that makes me think of New York, whether it's a subway train, a New York taxi cab, a mailbox, you know, that's covered in graffiti. Because this project was made during the pandemic, I wanted to recreate this part of the city where it was like a busy, crowded street and a busy, crowded subway. So I asked people to send photos of themselves, a photo of themselves walking down the street and a photo of themselves standing in the subway. And I got a pretty good response. People from around the world were sending me pictures, and I'll keep adding more photos as people send them to me until I really have no more space on the sidewalk. I think New York is not just the buildings, it's not just the subway or the transportation, it's made up of the people in the city, and that diverse group is what makes New York beautiful.
So to be clear, most of that was made during the lockdown. So instead of, an artist always has this thing, I wish I had more time to do more work. And I really exploited that. And I had a lot of friends who were depressed. So those photos they sent, it was like people who were just really locked at home, bummed out, and I wanted to do a project collective with them and bring a little happiness to myself and them. So I would take photos of them in the city and be like, hey, you're now in a busy New York City street on a busy subway. So I know those are things you miss. Here you are. I'm passing around, though, there's a water tower that's floating around that shows an example of some of that. And to keep in mind, the water towers for that spring break show was, again, this concept of like, I have a sketchbook. I like doing dogs. I put them up on the streets. How can I exploit this more? Oh, I know. I'm going to put them on water towers because that's like street art mixes with New York City. It's a weird way to show artwork, and then people really loved it.
Your artwork and stuff, how long does it usually take when you spread it around the city? Oh.
When I'm putting the artwork around the city, here's your zine. This is a wonderful street artist. I normally, when I'm doing the street art, I try to do it days that are not too busy. I do it at night when it's dark for clear reasons, and I do it on my bike. This is a kid's book I did with my daughter. So instead of reading the stupid kid's book she had, I decided to write one with her, and then this is that girl Vera. So if you saw in Self-Medicated, the woman who was doing the street art, this is her artwork.
Are there any pieces that you discarded in the middle of it, and what do you do with it afterwards?
Any pieces I would discard in the middle? Yeah, all the time. I usually use that as, like if there's a piece I work on and I don't like it or I stop, I keep it. I don't throw it out because I find I can use those materials for something else. The water tower one, I was doing a set for animation and I made this kind of like grain tower, but instead of throwing it out, I kept it and changed it into a water tower. Or like, these dogs, like some of the dogs I don't like, but then I'm like, all right, well, somebody asked me to do a community refrigerator. I'm going to put some of my less stronger pieces, meaning I'm not as excited about them, but people loved it. So yeah, I find that even your failures can be used. You should never throw anything out. Not saying you should be a hoarder, but you might come back to it later and say, oh, this piece will fit into something else. Which is another important thing. It's always good to work collaboratively because you learn someone else's practice. You get your art injected into someone else's art. So I always try to think of like, whether it's real or not, like, oh, this is an artist better than me and I really like their work. I'm going to reach out to them and say, hey, can we do something together? And then, then it's like in their history, it's like this artist is connected to them because they collaborated together.
So what's like your favorite medium to work with out of all of them?
That's my biggest problem, is that I have a lot of people who say, you write books, you do zines, you make movies, you do visual arts. And they're always saying the problem is that I should focus on one of those as opposed to doing all of them. But I don't think they're separate. I think it's one art project. So it's like my films are similar to the way I write books or the way I do zines, and my visual arts. So I just feel like it's blocks in one wall. So I don't really see them as separate. I see them as complementing each other. So when I'm doing visual art, I'm documenting it. When I'm here talking to you guys, I'm documenting it. And all of that might end up in a film later. So I don't really see it as a separate thing. From your perspective, so whatever you're passionate about, you should follow. And even if you're passionate about separate things, you should definitely follow it. Because it's like, this is the time in your life, and I'm 52, so I'm still doing it. is experimenting and trying new things.
How did you know art was your calling?
I didn't really have a choice. I think if you were sitting there going like, oh, I'm going to make a lot of money because I'm going to do art, you're not. You probably should rethink that. I'm making art because I don't have a choice. And I feel like most of you understand that you're making stuff creative because you have no other choice.
Who's your favorite artist?
There's an artist called Francis Bacon who's a painter. The very first time I went and saw some of his work at the Modern Museum of Art in Washington, D.C., I was really affected by it emotionally. I never thought that a piece of artwork could make somebody feel this way. Yeah, I like Wes Anderson films. I hate to say it. Charles Bukowski is my favorite writer, and Francis Bacon's my favorite painter.
So what are some angles you have for what you do? Like any big goals that you want to have achieved or have set for yourself?
Bigger books published, more films in bigger places. I want to have art shows in larger locations. I want to generate lots of money from doing art. I'm lucky that I do an art practice that incorporates community. So the more that I expand, the bigger I get, the more it helps my community. And all different backgrounds and economics. At the same time, I feel like the more they expand, the more they're helping me too. So it's a win-win.
How long did it take you to be financially stable with your art?
I'm not financially stable with my art. Are you kidding? No. My normal paycheck is as a video editor for TV shows. So generally, that's how I make the most of my income. Before that, I was an art handler for a blue chip gallery in Chelsea. I've done all kinds of jobs. I was grip and electric for independent films around Manhattan. So I just got a text where somebody's like, help me install this wall thing. And I'm like, sure, because I'm in between jobs, I'll take whatever. There's a thing where most people who do art, they're like, I'm going to show in a gallery and I'm going to be this big famous artist, or I'm going to be a filmmaker and be making my own films. That's not really true. And any film or art school or whatever that tries to sell that to you is lying, because it is less than 0.10001% that are usually those successful artists or filmmakers. And all of those people usually have prior connections that you'll never have. You go backwards, say, I want to be in New York City art galleries. You go to those galleries, you look at those artists, you find out what schools they went to, and usually you'll see the defining factors, the graduate school they went to. Stanford, Columbia. It's like these three schools are the majority of New York City's most working artists. And why is that? Because the people who own the galleries and that have the money are sending their kids to that place, and they're making those connections at that school. But that's okay. That shouldn't discourage you. You have to make a choice, am I making art to make money, or am I making art to fulfill something in my soul, something creative? And you can make money and you can fulfill what's in your soul, but you have to figure out where you fit in that ecosystem. So if you're a filmmaker, you might have to be an editor, you might have to be lighting department, you might have to be post-works, you might have to be pre-production. If you're an artist, you might have to be an art handler, you might have to be an art trucker, you might have to be a gallery assistant. So there's all these different places for you to fit, because there's a whole economy that works in it, but that doesn't mean that you'll necessarily be the star. So for me, it's sometimes I want to be the star. Sometimes I want to make a show that's centered on me. Sometimes I want to make a movie or a book centered on me. But I'll also continuously at the same time do the grunt work that allows me to survive, taking on the video jobs. And
as an artist in New York, did it ever get so hard to the point where you wanted to give up, you didn't want to do it anymore?
Yeah, that's why we started the Antagonist movement, because we were a whole bunch of artists that were not getting art shows. And then we kind of looked around and said, there's a ton of artists who are not getting art shows. In fact, the majority of artists in New York City and people who move there come there with the concept of showing art or doing something creative and realize the rents are very expensive and they have to get a day job, and then they don't have time to do art. So we said, well, why don't we create venues to let people show their art? And by doing that, meaning like going to a bar, you have a blank wall, can I show some art? You're a coffee shop, can I do some art? You have a stage back there. Can I have a band play? Can I have a spoken word? Can we show a film? And because of that, giving those artists those chance in those venues allowed them to get in and have a testing ground. And now it's like crazy. I did the spring break art show, and I'm there, and somebody comes up like, did you start an art movement? I know you, and like, you changed my life, and I have a whole career because of that. So it's a weird thing in New York. It's like, if you have an art economy, but you don't have a way to foster new artists, it's really stifling, because if you want that economy to thrive wherever it is, you have to give chances to untested artists. So it's like a catch-22, right?
What is your most favorite project to do? And I also have a suggestion. I went to Australia in middle school, and there's a lot of street art there. In some places it's legal, so maybe go there. But what's your favorite project that you've ever done?
Well, we did a big art project in Sydney, Australia. We showed films and did a gallery show there in Redfern, and worked with local artists. And also keep in mind, when I say when we're doing art shows international, we're not coming there as colonialists, meaning like, here's our art and look at us. We're connecting with local groups of artists. We're coming up with a theme together. We're creating an art show together. So, but yeah, like Melbourne has more of the street art. Sydney does have a lot of street art, but we didn't really do street art that time.
Art supply that you want to try, but you haven't been able to, and you also have one that you absolutely hate, and you're like, I'm never going to use this again.
I don't think I have one that I hate. Currently right now on a residency on Governor's Island, which you guys should all look this up. It's done by a group called fourheads.org. You can find them on Instagram at fourheads_NYC. And they provide, it's an island on the tip of Manhattan, and they have all these empty houses. And each artist gets to have a room inside a house. So right now I have a residency there. I'm doing 3 months of working on the island. There's no charge. The thing is, you have to have done their art fair before, and then you're open to do the residency. So on the island right now, I'm working on this epoxy. It's like 2 different things you mix together, and I've been making like little figures. So I am testing new things constantly, and I try to always test new materials, because what I find is that you never know the connection. Like I'd mentioned before, like I do this show about cosplaying other creatives, and I'm not really into the cosplay thing, but one of the interviews I did was this guy, Steven, who does this HD film, and then he kind of showed me the whole process, and so I just made a mask using the process I learned that I wasn't used to, and it was a much easier process. So you have to be always trying to experiment, because that's going to give you the edge. Like again, you're in competition. Like you're going to go out one day and be like, I want to get a job, and what are the things that are going to make you more qualified? It's going to be the things that you know that somebody else doesn't know. It's going to be the connections that you have that somebody else doesn't have. So exploit the people around you and try a lot of new things. Here's your card. Give me your question.
Since you've been going around into different countries, which is probably your favorite place to visit for the street art?
I mean, I guess Ecuador was pretty fun. In Ecuador, it's a very different system. There with the street art, you don't go and put it up on walls. And we had some of our guys that were just doing that, which is a no-no. What you do is you go up to the house, you knock on the door. Hey, do you mind if we paint something on the front of the wall or your building or whatever? You show them your sketchbook and they give you permission. So it's a much friendlier thing. So Ecuador is cool. We did a ton of pieces in Quito and in Ambato. And Vera, who's in that film, runs this graffiti festival in Ambato where it's like films and music, and street artists from all over the world go there. So we were invited to do that, and we did a bunch of stencil art and stuff.
Do you believe in like the idea of like bad art?
Do I believe in the bad art? No. I believe there's art that you don't connect with. Like I'm not somebody who's really into abstract art, but I don't really want to say that that's bad art. You know, Jackson Pollock was popular. It's just something I'm not connected to. So I think when you have something like critics or reviews, which is something necessary when you're making art, you need to have people writing about it and all of that. Like it's just part of the ecosystem. But for me personally, when I review things, I just don't review things I'm not into. So if I review it It's only stuff I'm into. I'm only going to have positive stuff. But that doesn't mean I review everything because I'm not connected to everything. What art medium have I not tried? I want to say singing, but then you just saw me singing, and I'm terrible at it, so I don't care. Performance art, I've done that. I made narrative films. Sewed? Yeah, I sewed. There's a whole film called Dolls of Lisbon. I made 100 handmade dolls where it's basically like stretched canvas over like old t-shirts, so it's like tight. And it's used canvas material. It's like painting canvas. And then I sent that to artists around the world, including the Ecuadorians. And then we showed that in a palace in Pop-Up Lisboa in Portugal for 2 months. So yeah, there's a whole film of me learning how to sew, making dolls, hands bleeding. Like, you know, I even sent like 30 dolls to a gallery in Portugal and they lost it, so that was really heartbreaking. I want to knit. That's the one that I was thinking about like doing, is knitting art. So I like this concept of where people look at me and they go, you're a big, mean-looking tattoo guy, but then I want to be seen like knitting. You know, I brought my daughter's unicorn backpack. So like in New York, like if I'm biking around and I have my unicorn backpack on, I'm waiting for to get in an argument with somebody. So to be like, yeah, it was some weird guy on a folding bike with a lot of tattoos and a unicorn backpack. So I have tattooed on somebody a little bit as a test, but I wouldn't try it.
When did you start doing art? Like, were you always artistic, or like, yeah?
I started making films when I was 6 years old. I started making art probably at 7. You'll have a thing I think you'll find universally. You have parents, and one of your parents makes the mistake of saying like, I really like that. And then you're like, I really like the feeling of somebody saying that, and that's kind of probably how it started.
So when it comes to like having an identity with your art, would it be possible to like make an identity that's like completely false online, and then that's how you can advertise your art without like getting caught lawfully, you know, politically?
The concept of making, you know, identities in art, yeah, that's absolutely doable, and a lot of people do that. A lot of street artists do that. You know, I think that's more of like a branding thing. So it's like how you're going to brand yourself. And I know that's a horrible thing. You've already all heard it, but unfortunately that's kind of how it is nowadays. But even Picasso was a brand. Warhol was a brand. You know, it's like, here's my name. This is the style of art you're going to get. We're not going to fall outside of that. It's absolutely fine to have a hidden identity. In the spring break art show, when I showed up there, by the way, my showstopper was that I put that mask on my head. So anytime someone tried to take a photo of me in the suit, I was like, nope, I got to cover my head. And then it was like this crazy mask thing. And then because of that, it got into Gothamists and a bunch of these big websites, and, you know, made a bunch of the main pages, because instead of just going there and being like, well, you'll photograph my camo suit, I made my head a part of the show.
Artwork do you think is that made the most impact?
Which of the pieces I've made have made the most impact? I made a bunch of these like films to try to promote a different, you know, groups of artists, and I think Self-Medicated has done pretty well. It's brought me here, but it's also, I've had people from New Zealand, all over the world who've contacted me from that movie because it's on YouTube Movies with ad play or something. That's probably the one that's most, but each thing, again, I've already said this, it's like you do a project, it's like a lottery ticket you're throwing down on yourself. There's one I did called the Sketchbook Battle, and that was played on this Worcester Collective site, which is like a big street art site for a long time. But with that, artists in Ecuador wrote me and said, hey, we really like that sketch battle thing. Do you mind if we do it? And I said, of course. I made a video so people could, you know, do these sketch battles. And then they started writing back and forth, and they sent me this package of art that I was like, this is amazing. Fanzines, books, posters, like really up my alley of art. And then I kept in contact with them. And then I said, hey, I'm doing this Dolls of Lisbon project. Do you mind if I send you some dolls for your artist to work on? They said, yeah. I sent them 3. They sent me back 6. So they took what I made and replicated other ones, so much better than I thought. And then I said, look, you guys, like, we're so connected, like spiritually, mentally. I was like, I want to do an art project with you guys there. So doing the sketchbook battle led me to going down to Ecuador, bringing a German artist and another one of our artists, and doing this collection of stuff Actually, we brought about like 7 artists. We all pay for our own flights, but then usually the local governments give us like housing. There's this whole thing of like, I find like, if you can get here, we'll house you. But I'd also say like when it comes to liking the things I do, I only like what I'm currently working on and I hate everything that I finished. Does this still feel like a game show? And the winner is...
So like, I'm not saying that these artists are bad by any means.
That means they're bad?
Do you think like the pieces of art that like are the most popular and like, as some people like to say, are iconic, like
Jeff Koons?
Do you think that they can be overrated sometimes?
Yes.
Sometimes I feel like some of the pieces like Starry Night's good, but it can be overrated.
Starry Night's that overrated piece of art?
For me.
There's a thing that I think people have a misconception of like what is good art and what is bad art. I was talking to this before, is that you see Mona Lisa and people are like, Mona Lisa, but if you look at the body of art by that artist, Mona Lisa is not the strongest. Mona Lisa is the one that everybody talked about. So it's like this thing, The Maven. So there's a book you should read called The Tipping Point, which is really good about how to get your message and art spread out there. And then that's really the basics is mavens. Mavens is somebody who comes up to you and goes like, that pink sweatshirt is amazing. You should check out that pink sweatshirt. Everybody should check out that pink sweatshirt. And then everybody's excited about the pink sweatshirt. And if you get 50 people who are mavens who are excited about that pink sweatshirt, that pink sweatshirt is theoretically a success. So Mona Lisa's painted. One guy goes, oh, the Mona Lisa, that's a good painting. I really like it. Let me tell all my friends. And then they're all talking about it. There's a lot of art like that. But the difference today is that you have whole marketing divisions behind it. So if Jeff Koons is putting out, I'm not a fan of Jeff Koons' work. I just would not want it around me. The difference is he's somebody who has a huge marketing department behind him. So it's not like a mistake that like, oh, it's written about in all the magazines. No, he has like people that are PR firms that are pushing it. You know, Damien Hirst too. Well, Damien Hirst is a terrible artist who names things really well. So I like Damien Hirst on the fact that like, oh, that's a genius title. Like that title makes me want to buy the piece.
How do you really deal with copyright issues or people that usually steal your art and say it's their own?
How do you deal with copyright issues and people who steal your art? Have you guys heard of Shepard Fairey? So Shepard Fairey does this Obey stuff. He did the Obama poster thing. There's a movie on Hulu about Shepard Fairey. And the other day I'm watching it and I go, hey, that's funny. That footage of Bikini Kill looks like, well, doesn't look like, I already know, that's my footage in this film. And they did not ask me for permission, right? And then I'm like, that's weird. I wonder if they gave me credit. I go to the end of the film, and I am credited in it. And I was like, that really like pisses me off because it's a whole film you watch about him dealing with copyrights and not, you know, getting sued and all of this. And I'm like, and then you made a film and you stole my footage and you didn't pay me and you didn't warn me about it. But the thing is like, I could launch a lawsuit. I could do all this. And then there's like fair use. And what is fair use? This is why you guys have a law department here, and you should all partner up with some of the lawyers and become buddies, because really the fact and the difference is that whether I want to mount the lawsuit, whether I'll win the lawsuit, which is always a thing of economics, and the chances are I probably won't win it, and in the end they'll probably be like, oh, we'll just give you a little bit of money. You could put your artwork out, people can steal it, people can steal the conceptual ideas and change it and claim it as their own. Are you guys all familiar with Richard Prince? So he made a whole living on stealing people's art and putting his name on it. And he's been sued. It's an annoying thing that you'll have to deal with. If you're an artist and you're an illustrator, you're definitely going to have to learn about licensing and the difference between works for hire. If somebody comes to you with a concept and pays you, they own it, you don't own it. If they come to you with an artwork that you've priorly made or you've made, doesn't matter if they bought it in a gallery or wherever, you own the intellectual rights to that, and they can only buy the actual artwork or license it from you. But again, this is the thing why it's annoying as heck, but you should really spend the time to learn some of the law when it comes to art, or befriend a lawyer.
How do you think having like your daughter has affected your work? Like, especially since you're a street artist, are you scared about getting arrested and like not seeing her again?
Well, first off, let's be clear. If they arrest me for street art, you're not being held for that long. You're in and out So I'm not afraid that they'll hold me in prison for years because I'm doing street art. No, my daughter, to me, and I talk about this in Man in Camo, a movie you guys should all watch, review, tell your friends, be the mavens I need. The whole last of the film is about that. I think of my daughter as an art project, and we're collaborative artists as opposed to parent-father. I mean, I'm definitely her dad because I yell at her all the time. While I'm on Governor's Island, she's my art assistant, so I pay her $25. I negotiated 50. She brought me down to 25, by the way, because she said, I don't want to do that much work. In my artwork, she does animation, like she helps me with animation, she helps me painting. I mean, I think even in the video before, you saw that she was helping me in the work. So she hates going to galleries. Let's play this video of the sketchbook battle, which is a terrible video. And then I'm going to come up the middle, sorry.
Hello, this is Ethan from the Antagonist Art Movement. We're down here at Sacred Gallery. We're doing a sketchbook party. Let's meet the people behind it. Let's go.
I wanted to do something a little different as far as getting together some of the artists and doing something creative outside of what we normally do. So I thought about having a little sketch party.
We do believe in supporting local art and artists, bringing them together to help foster a community here in New York City.
Plenty of snacks, wines, and alcohol.
So this is the pass around. 2 minutes, draw from your mind, in your sketchbook, pass to the left. Everybody will get a little bit of everybody else's art in your sketchbook.
Well, you know, I think it's good to get everybody involved together and get to see what other people are doing and, you know, just interaction between artists, because you know us artists, we like to hide away in our little studios and paint by ourselves, so this is good for us.
The idea behind it is basically everyone just brings a sketchbook, pass it around to different artists, and draw something in there, whatever they want. Just have a fun with it. We need a break between each session, okay? Very important. Break means chat, drink, eat, mingle, and then get back to sketching.
So right now we're going to start the sketch battle. That's when two artists face each other in a face-off in their sketching prowess.
There can only be one sketch artist.
They will be judged. Get ready, set, battle. In round 2, each competitor gets to pick one prop for their opponent. Stop. Put your pens down.
Dan's sketch looked like an old lady and not so much like Eric's. So I'm going to go with Eric because that's pretty accurate.
DK winner!
I lost.
For the first time I won't fail. For the first time I won't fail. For the first time I won't fail, and now she'll know that she's been leading me nowhere, and I don't wanna go. For the first time I won't fail, and now she'll know that she's been leading me nowhere, but it's all that I know. For the first time I won't fail. For the first time I won't fail. For the first time
Bullshit. You need a new judge. Someone should judge the judge.
If you or anyone you know out there would like to do this, feel free to copy us and make your own sketchbook party.
And if you'd like to be part of it, email me at antagonistart@aol.com. That's antagonistart.
Do not email there. That email is dead. I mean, this is like probably 20 years ago. I didn't even have facial hair then. Weird. I was a baby. Next question. Wait, I promised to go up the middle.
How do your kids feel about your art, how much art you make or produce?
My daughter? My wife hates my art. It's always in the way. It consumes the whole house. Buildings I made at one point during a pandemic, if you have the concept of I'm going to take every box that comes in and make it into a building, and we're not going to put any trash out in the street. We're going to upcycle everything that comes in. Means you quickly have a house filled with boxes and trash. And then it's like, I built all those houses, and then my wife was like, there's no room for us, you gotta get rid of it. And then I carted it all over to my mother's house, who lives on the west side. She had a spare room, and I filled that up. And now she's like basically in her living room, like whenever she's on Skype or something, it's like, here's all the New York City buildings behind me. She's my toughest critic. She'll be like, this is nice, maybe we can sell it. Like, she's my art dealer. And actually in one of the videos, I'm always like my art dealer. She's always pushing it. But yeah, sometimes I'll get my wife to go like, I didn't say I hate it. It's okay.
Have you started any new projects?
I'm always starting a new project. I currently have a script for a narrative film that I'm working on with my team. I have a book called The Antagonists, a fully done book that I've been working on for 5 years. I have 2 documentaries, one on an artist, Scooter LaForge, that you should all look up. In New York City, they kind of have these new artists that come up, and it's like, who's the darling of the downtown art scene? And he's kind of like the king, Scooter LaForge. He's going to be super famous. So yeah, I'm doing those 2 documentaries. I have an art show that I'm currently working on called The Pawn Shop, where, you know, we're going to do we buy and sell your art. So it's like 3 artists showing art, but then we're making it that the community can come in and try to sell us work, which then instantly makes them a part of a show. But they're going to be very disappointed because we have this guy who's like one of our writers, who's like a, I'm walking here kind of New York guy, you know, like surly, and he'll be like, I'll give you $10 for it, you know, like he'll downsell anybody. And so if they're going to have art in it, they have to walk in off the street, try to sell it to him, and he's going to give them like no money. But you could then be theoretically in the show with us instantaneously. I juggle usually 6 or 7 projects at any time, and I take as much time as I need to finish it.
Is there anything you've done with your completed works that you regret or would like to correct?
I'm going to maybe expand that a little bit. Instead of saying individual work, as a curator, I made a mistake of trying to do this art show in Houston, Texas, where basically all the work I did was stolen. So this is like a curatorial lesson, is to make sure you have contracts, maybe insurance, be careful who you work with. But the gist of it was, I was contacted by a gallery in Houston. They asked me to do the show. I put a show together. I asked a bunch of my artists to do individual original works. They drove up and they were like, yeah, we drove nonstop and we took all this crystal meth. Should I really give these guys the art? Like, clearly there's a lot of issues here. But then it's like I'm dealing with 2 meth heads who are here to collect art, and they drove all the way there. So I was like, I'm just going to have faith, and I lost all that art. I mean, I have artists now that are like, you're the guy who lost my art, and still mad at me, and that's totally justified. And I completely get it. And it wasn't like intentional, but I understand their anger and I empathize, and I did everything I could. And I did get a few pieces back. It got pretty brutal. So it's kind of one of those things like, if you need something, here's somebody that we could find to reach out to. We had a legal component where if our street artists were busted, we would at least get legal advice on how to operate and navigate that. Oh, and everyone, I'm on Instagram. Please add me. And if you have questions outside of this, you can feel free to write me there. Not necessarily that I'll answer everything, but I will always do my best to do so.
Have you attended art school, or did you just do everything by yourself?
Do you think I went to art school?
I have no idea.
No, seriously, take a guess.
Probably not.
No, I did. I went to School of Visual Arts for my undergraduate, and I got my master's in media communications from the New School. And the whole reason I even went to New York is because I was in a time period when I was getting into a lot of trouble, and I was lucky that I had parents that had the ability to send me to art school. And I also got in. In high school, I was taking night classes at the art college in DC when I was a kid, so I had everything prepped and ready to go, and lucky that I had the opportunity to do it, and I did decide to go to New York and do it.
What would you say your most difficult project has been, and was it worth it?
Most difficult project? I think the books are most difficult for me, being that I'm dyslexic. You know, I have a big chip on my shoulder about that. I have a lot of people who were telling me I was an idiot and I was stupid and I'd be worthless because I didn't do and perform as well, like with the writing thing. So I decided to do a fanzine because I didn't really, it's like, well, heck with it, I'll just put it all out there. And I go through this very thorough process of where I write, I type it, I verbalize it and record it, and then put it into a Word doc, have it read back to me in the internal Word doc. Then I send it to my editors. So it's this very long process of having editors go through it, have people read it, give me notes and change it. So like a book can take me like 12 years to do, and it may not be perfect. You know, I'm still going to put myself out there, even though it's like not quite as harsh as this, but like a blind man painting. So like somebody dyslexic writing a book is a task on a level that I don't think most people understand the dedication that it would take to complete that.
What would you say is the hardest part of putting together an art show?
The hardest part of putting together an art show is finding the venue. It's always getting the gallery. So if you have like galleries and spaces here, like that sketchbook thing, we did that between two shows. So we said to the gallery, you know, all we need is like one weekend, a few hours. We can do it when in between shows, so there's no art up on the walls. There's all these spaces around you, including here, where businesses would be happy to have some kind of event coming in because you're bringing people in. We always did this approach of like trying to reach to venues and seeing how many of them would give us access to what they have. Beg for a space, and we would beg multiple spaces until people were comfortable giving it to us. And then the other part is that we always treated those spaces with respect. So we made sure everything was clean and properly put back. We made sure that the staff was tipped. We made sure everybody was happy. You want those kind of rumors spreading around you if you're an artist. You want people to know that if they ask you to do something, it's going to be good for them, and it's going to be good for the community, and they're going to invite you back. I think there's lots of opportunities all over the place, but you have to be willing to take the time and submit and do the process, and like the submitting process can be tough. There's opportunities all the time. I'm somebody who just says yes to everything. So I'm literally here. I say yes. A day before this, I was teaching adults with disabilities in New York. The week before that, I was teaching animation with animation kids from the Bronx, and then before that, FIT, and doing artwork on a refrigerator, like one of those community refrigerators where they give out free food. So I'm just somebody who just says yes to everything. You know, sometimes that works. How many films? On my IMDb, I'm credited with making 8 feature films. Some of those date back to the 90s. Those films can be found pretty much anywhere that you rent and buy movies, whether it's iTunes, Amazon, Fios, YouTube, Google Play, whatever. Some of those films have played in like the Brooklyn Museum of Art museums and things like that. So there's 2 more that are about to come out in the next year or 2. For short films, probably over 400 to 500 short films.
Thank you so much. That's been great.
Anybody else want cards?